Bonsoir et bienvenue à la réunion publique du 22 juin 2023. Good evening and welcome to the public meeting zoning, June 22nd, 2023. Opening of the agenda. We have adoption of the agenda. I'll need a mover and a seconder. Mr. Zval, appuyé de Madame Bigelow. All those in favor? Those against? Carried. So on va disclosure of pecuniary interest. Intérêt pécuniaire? Aucune. On s'en va le thème numéro 4. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment, Smith filed Z-03-2023. Madame Laforêt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I prepared a brief presentation for zoning application Z-03-2023, and this is for a property on County Road 17. So next slide. So the public meeting is a requirement under the Planning Act for any applications under Section 34 and 36 of the Planning Act when we change the zoning of a property. And so this is important because anybody who wishes to appeal a zoning application must participate in the public meeting process. And if a person or a public body doesn't make a representation at the public meeting, they're not necessarily entitled to make representations or to participate in the Ontario Land Tribunal or the Local Planning Appeal Tribunal under the Planning Act. And so this is just a quick disclaimer before we get into the details of the application. And so the zoning bylaw amendment proposes a zoning change for property at 1863 County Road 17. Obviously, every zoning amendment is slightly different. There's different considerations to be mindful of when approving the rezoning. This municipal address might seem familiar to council because, of course, the application, or there was an application for consent about 2 years ago to sever a dwelling from farmland. And so you'll recognize some of these standard agricultural zones. And so they're special exception zones to control residential development on the farmland that's severed and then control agricultural uses on a retained residential lot, which are often too small for viable agricultural standalone uses. Okay, next slide. So this is obviously a special zoning application. This is just a location of the property. But one thing I will note is that, and you'll see it detailed quite a lot in the report, is that the applicant has requested to maintain a barn on the property. And barns, as we'll see in the later part of this application, are a bit of a gray zone when it comes to retained residential properties. They are purpose-built agricultural buildings, but they're charming and unique, and oftentimes you'll see the willingness from the property owner to retain those buildings. And so we've provided a bit of analysis for council on that. So going back to the provincial policy statement, this is very top of mind, obviously, because there's been some recent discussions at the provincial level about farm severances. But we go back to the current provincial policy statement, which says that we must maintain agricultural uses in agricultural zones. And what that means is we really must preserve the farmland. In the provincial policy statement, they're very clear about what is appropriate for severances or lot creation, but there's not too much direction on what buildings are appropriate for that retained residential lot. Next slide. So you look at the official plan. Again, the official plan really reiterates a lot of that policy direction from the provincial policy statement. It wants us to allow surplus residential consents, and it will apply surplus dwelling policies to areas where there's a lot of farm land, and so they'll want to make sure that multiple lot creation is restricted as much as possible in areas where there's that prime agricultural use. The zoning bylaw, it's very common for us to have exception zones in our zoning bylaw, which are basically site-specific zoning that allow property owners to retain some of those farm buildings. So for hobby farms, this is very common. So you'll have let's say a severed lot with five acres. That hobby farm use allows like a larger building to be on it, presumably for like a barn. But what we see today in this particular application is that there's a willingness or there's a desire to maintain a barn that exceeds the size allowances for that hobby farm use. So it's a barn that's existing, but it's larger than what we typically would allow on a hobby farm lot of 5 acres. So this just gives council a little bit of an overview. So hobby farms, they're about 2 acres, and the maximum size for a barn would be 240 meters. And then that's compared to a rural residential lot where we have 1.9 acres and about 150 meters square for a detached garage. So this is just a quick overview of some of the special exception zones that we've created lately. So we've allowed, again, some of these barn buildings to be maintained. Some of them are quite large. I think the largest one we allowed was like 560 square meters, which is quite big. The barns, working with people that have actually purchased those properties, the barns kind of become liabilities because people, they're basically zoned as for residential use. It's very hard to adapt them to other uses. So, we're experiencing a little bit of challenges now with people that have bought these hobby farm buildings and have to renovate them in a way that respects the zoning, or they have to then apply again for zoning, a special exception zone, to turn them into any kind of commercial rural use. So it's a little bit administrative heavy, but it's how we would control the uses of those barns that are retained on the property. I will say that we have been pretty clear when it comes to other buildings on a property like a silo or a grain bin, that those aren't really compatible with a hobby farm use. And we've been pretty consistent on requiring those features to be removed from lots. So this is just a site sketch survey that was prepared for the severance application, and you can see the single detached dwelling and then the size of the barn. I will note that there are actually 2 barns on the property, but one was damaged from the windstorm, and so it's in the process of being demolished. And that's the barn that is requiring the special exception zone. So the application was received on May 1st. We published the notices of the zoning amendment on May 30th. And then, of course, today it's the public meeting. It's the opportunity from the members of the public to participate and ask questions and make representations to council. My administration hasn't heard from any of the neighbors in this area. And so we haven't noted any comments in the planning report. There will be a 20-day appeal period from the date of decision by council. And I will say, if you're here, hello, if you're here in the public, please sign your name on the sheet on the table to make sure that we can contact you once there's been a decision on the file, on the application. So that's it, Mr. Mayor. I'd be happy to answer questions from council if there are any.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Laforêt. Thank you so much. At this time, I'd ask council if they have any questions to Madame Laforêt in regards to her presentation in regards to the zoning. Seeing none. Also from the public, if there's any for or against comments that anybody would want to come forward. Les gens ont le droit de participer à cette réunion. Donc, si vous êtes en faveur ou contre, ce sera le temps de venir à l'avant puis de mentionner si vous êtes pour ou contre. Aucune du public. Donc, ça termine la présentation de cette réunion publique. Merci beaucoup, Mme Laforêt. Donc, ça va être apporté à notre réunion régulière, cette demande. Donc, on va passer au thème numéro 5, l'ajournement. I'll need a mover and a seconder to adjourn, M. Roy. Seconded by Mme Clément. All those in favor? Those against? Carried. Merci beaucoup. On va vous revenir dans 2 minutes, juste le temps de changer notre vidéo pour s'en aller sur YouTube ou sur le live stream, donc pour commencer la réunion.